Good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we are here with another of our virtual events. And today, we are really happy to have Michael Sears back with us after several years' absence. It's funny, I don't have a copy. They have the ARCs of Tower of Babel, but Michael was kind enough to sign a batch for us, and they're on their way to us now. But I do have a nice signed first of first book.
Wow.
Black Fridays, yeah, from the archives here at the Poison Pen, and then Hank Phillippi Ryan, our good friend and intrepid host, is going to be doing the moderating of today's discussion, and I'm going to be, as usual, just sort of monitoring the Facebook comments as they come in. So if you have questions for Michael or Hank or Barbara, go ahead and type them in the comments field, and I'll put a link also to the signed copies of the Tower of Babel. But anyway, I'm going to turn it over to you, Hank and Barbara, and I'll go into the darkness for a little while.
Thank you. It's like a magician's act. He disappears and then magically reappears, not even sawed into pieces. So, Michael, I am raising a glass to you to toast the publication of Tower of Babel, which is your first book in several years.
Yes.
How many has it been?
2016, 5 years was the last of the Jason Stafford books, and I wrote a standalone that nobody liked. My agent didn't like it. My editor didn't like it. I rewrote it over and over, thinking I was going to get it right, and finally realized, no, they're right. But I don't want to write the book they want me to write. And lo and behold, years had gone by in that process. So I then came upon this idea, and this was something that people did like. So.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that. I was really fond of your Jason Stafford books, and I am not a huge fan of financial thrillers because often either it's too hard for me or I just don't care. But Jason was wonderful, and the books were exciting. And Michael, with a serious career in finance, made it all intelligible as well as chilling and bloodthirsty and all that good stuff. So I'm delighted that he's back, and we're in Queens, New York. We are not on Wall Street here. And is it going to be the start of a series?
Yes, I started this book as a standalone again, and the more I got into it, the more I realized that there's so much more I could do with these characters, and definitely with the environment with Queens. It's the single most ethnically, culturally diverse place on the planet, and that makes for all kinds of interesting conflicts and whatnot, and not just in terms of culture, but personalities too. So
well, good
it's
for
a good
you.
place
For a
to work
person,
for a while.
you bet. For a person who spent 20 years on Wall Street, going to Queens, I think is quite an adventure. And I'm also delighted to hand this over to Hank Phillippi Ryan, winner of 40-some Emmy Awards, intrepid investigative reporter, doyen of Boston's crime and journalism scene. Our most recent book, First to Lie, is nominated this year for a Mary Higgins Clark Award. And Hank, I can't even count the number of Agatha Awards and at least one Anthony that Hank has won. So we're really lucky that she is gracing us with her stellar being your operative word this year, isn't it?
Yes.
Stellar was the word at her starred review in Publishers Weekly. So we've been saying stellar a lot. Anyway, that she has graced us with her stellar presence to talk to Michael about Tower of Babel. So onward.
Thank you. That's so funny. I'm going to have a T-shirt made for all of us that says stellar. That was my Publishers Weekly starred review for the First to Lie, casually displayed behind me. So Barbara, I love you to tease me about that. It's a good tease. Thank you. Michael, I am your hugest fan. I couldn't have been more thrilled to see this book. I think we first met when you were nominated for the Edgar, right? For Black Fridays. Was that when it was?
I think, didn't we meet at Albany Voucher Con?
Exactly. Did any of you go? I can't see your comments. So if you're saying, "Oh, I was there," "Oh, I was there" on Facebook, I can't see it, but I will look at them later. There was this place in Albany in Bouchercon that was the Egg, a building called the Egg. Remember that? And it
Oh,
was so
yes.
weird. And in Albany that weekend, it was raining. It was like Blade Runner. It was deserted. But if that's where it was, okay, I'm sure you have a far better memory than I do. But you were nominated for the Edgar for Black
I was
Friday.
nominated for the Edgar.
And for
Oh,
best
oh,
first.
you are right. You are right. We did meet that night. That night was a tough night for me. There's not much I remember from that night, but yes, we did meet then.
And it was so, I mean, I wonder though, what an exciting thing, what a fabulous thing to be nominated for your first novel.
Yes,
And I
indeed.
wonder, are you were so excited, and I bet you're still as excited now that you have this new book coming out, which shows, you can do this.
Absolutely. I'm not young. I've had a extraordinary life of being able to do pretty much what I wanted. I worked on Wall Street. I was an actor, and now I'm a writer. And to have this opportunity at this point in my life to have my work published, to be recognized for it, it's just out of this world. Each moment along here is great. And
Have you always wanted to be a writer? Was this a thing that was in your heart from the beginning, no matter what course you went to?
I always wrote, and way back when, as a young actor, I also wrote. I wrote film scripts. I wrote short stories. I just keeping my mind active, and leaving a career that paid practically nothing. I decided to go to Wall Street rather than become a writer that also pays practically nothing. But so.
I mean, where did you grow up? Where did you grow up? Were you a reader when you were a kid?
Oh yeah. I blame my mother. She was a reader herself, and the two of us would go to the library together. That was, at least every 2 weeks, if not every week. And she encouraged me with, she'd see me enjoying the Thurber, and she'd say, "Oh, you like Thurber? Why don't you try Bentley?" And then a couple of years later, "You've really got to read S.J. Perelman." And it was guiding her, her helping me, and then I took off on my own. I read everything. I remember my father asking me at one point why I was reading War and Peace, which I was in high school and all those names were just killing me and whatnot. And I said, "Well, because I'm a reader. Aren't I supposed to have read War and Peace at some point in my life?" And thank God I don't have to now.
But you were exploring, and that you were sort of seeing what your mind would do and what your mind would go, and how many Russian nicknames you could handle in one go. It's interesting though, because in War and Peace is a big saga and a big story, but it's also about the individual people. Yeah. And that's why it's important, and that's why we still do read it. And Tower of Babel, do you say Babel or Babel?
I'm from the part of the world that says Babel.
Okay, I think I could go either way, but okay, we'll go with Babel, definitely, which sort of makes more sense in an idea that people are talking but not understanding each other. Yes. I want to talk to you about that in a minute, but we're going to get by the dreaded author question, okay, and then we'll be done with this part.
Okay.
What is the book about?
Oh.
I know we hate it, but just because people have not read it yet, when someone says to you, "Oh, you're writing, you've got a new book," what is it? What would you say?
It's a love story. All of the main characters are driven by finding love or expressing love, or expressing it very badly, allowing themselves to be warped to to do it. It's also got some murder, political corruption, gangsters and whatnot, but it's a love story.
I mean, see, this is why you are who you are. This is why you're such a terrific writer, that you would make it be about love, because no one else would describe it that way. You know, it's really, it's a noirish mystery, financial mystery about politics and corruption and real estate schemers and the little guy and the system and, you know, how people are manipulated and the power of money. But yes, I so agree that underneath that all is this heart of real people who love others and are trying to do the best they can. And it stars Ted Malloy. So start with Ted. Tell us a little bit about Ted.
Ted Malloy is a guy from Queens, and he didn't go to the best school. He didn't go to Harvard, Yale for his law degree, and yet through just grit and hard work, he ended up as a junior partner at a major law firm before his life fell apart. And over the next few years, he kept taking major steps down, and he's finally at a point where he hasn't even updated his law license in a couple of years, and is making a living as kind of a foreclosure vulture, as others have described it. But dabbling in weird real estate transactions that make him enough to get by. And when we meet him at that point, he's not at the absolute bottom. He could go lower, but he's decided that this is where he's okay. He can get by here and have some self-respect, but he's not a particularly nice guy.
But you do love him. I mean, you can't help but love Ted Malloy. He's a good guy who tried to do his best and made some mistakes. For some bizarre reason, and tell me if this is ridiculous, it kind of reminds me of a down and out Bonfire of the Vanities. You know what I mean? It's like in the same financial milieu, there are financial schemes. There are people that you think are not that great of people, but you kind of like them otherwise, and people trying to do the best they can. And that's sort of what it was for me. And then early in his career, he's on his way up as a lawyer, and then he meets a girl, typical noir story. And what happens about that?
Ted is pretty much oblivious of the kind of issues that Mackenzie Zielinski is facing. She's a community activist, and currently her big project is fighting a mammoth tower, residential and commercial building that they're going to put up in Corona, Queens, that will essentially destroy a number of neighborhoods in the process. And she's working hard against it. Kenzie is all heart. She's pushy and strong and smart, but she leads with her heart, and that's what Ted sees in her and what really captivates him. And at first, I don't think he understands it, but he wants to learn more. He's attracted to it. So.
Yeah. But going back to sort of the plot of the story, and this is another, I mean, it's one of these things that only you, Michael Sears, could have written this book, because the underpinnings of understanding the real estate and financial world are so complex and so complicated, and you make them be fun and simple and understandable, and the reader feels smart reading this book. Somehow you do that. Is this scheme that Ted is in on, is this a real thing? Talk a little bit about that.
Oh gosh, I did this.
Oh, you did this. Oh,
I did this. Yeah. And yeah, people It's called surplus money, and people who are in foreclosure, often at the end of the whole process, when the building or house or whatever it is finally sold at auction, they're so distraught, so blown away, they just walk away. And at that point, their lawyer just got paid out of the proceeds from the sale. And maybe they still owe their lawyer money and whatnot. No one cares about the fact that the property actually sold for more than was owed. And that money sits there. And if it sits there long enough, the state just says, thank you very much. And they get to keep it.
So it sort of escheats or goes to unclaimed property in the
Yep.
state. And so if somebody interferes at that moment before the state gets it, but before the owner or someone who cares realizes that the money is there, what can they do?
Oh, well, Ted's business is to go find whoever owns that money, whether they know it that they own it or not. He goes and he finds them and he cuts a deal with them. I can get you, X amount of money that was left over. And really 3/4 of the time, their first response is, no, I lost that building. There's no money left. There's nothing. And convincing the poor person who was in that situation that, yeah, there's actually some money left over and you're entitled to it. And for a cut, I can get it for you. And that's his business. He doesn't do residential foreclosures because it's too heartbreaking. He does commercial properties only, and figuring that these people walked in with their eyes wide open to whatever got them into trouble that they were foreclosed on, and if they get anything out of it at this point, they should be very pleased.
I mean, again, bonfire of the vanities. Remember how Wolf talked about, that he makes money from the crumbs of other people's transactions.
Yes.
And that is exactly what happens here too. I also love that Ted is wary of the big score and would rather sort of sit and work in mediocrity. Talk about that a little bit.
From personal experience, finding a large amount of surplus money in an account, there are extraordinary stories about why that's there and why no one has claimed it. And sometimes they're kind of run-of-the-mill. Well, there was a divorce, there was a partner breakup, they can't agree on who's going to get it, so it sits there and until finally someone is going to break through and do it. In other cases, they're parking the money, they're hiding it. And it's unless you've done the research and gone through the county clerk's files and whatnot, you don't know that it's there. And in that way, as in my book, it's a way of passing money pretty much hidden. You don't need Bitcoin.
You make it so fascinating, and then you make it hilarious, sort of, I guess. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Well, because the guy who gives Ted the work is one of the best characters I've read in a long time in fiction. Talk about him a little bit.
The guy who,
on page 1.
All right. Can I read the first paragraph? It's only a couple of sentences. And this first paragraph was the first paragraph I wrote in this book. Everything else got changed over and over again. This paragraph has always been the same. Little Richie was a hard man to like, though if Ted had known Richie was going to be dead in 3 days, maybe he would have tried a little harder. And Richie is...
I thought you were going to go on. I thought you were going to read a little bit more. I mean, who wouldn't love that opening? Because, it takes you into Ted, it takes you into Richie, it telegraphs instantly what the whole story is about, that Ted has heart, that he would have been sad had he known. And also that Richie is just kind of a weasel, right? I think that's what you
Yes.
call him.
Yes. Yep.
I love the weasel part. You know, you said a really true thing, Hank, when you said that Michael has a gift for making his readers feel smart. And that's what I was trying to say earlier about the Jason Saffords, because, you know, he had a way of presenting these complicated financial transactions, whatever the whole deal was. And you could follow it. And, you know, it made you feel like you were pretty smart, that, you know, here was this Wall Street thing going on, and yet you could keep up. It's also a really Miltonian design. I mean, the fall from grace, you know, is something that you often see in financial and legal thrillers. You really do, because, you know, some guys got like a really great and successful practice in a law firm. He doesn't have any incentive for helping, you know, and so very often I find that legal thrillers start where some catastrophic thing sends this guy into a fall from grace, or basically out of his partnership at his fabulous law firm, and he has to, like, you know, go pro bono or do whatever. But the Stafford stories were somewhat like that too, and then, you know, you've got somebody where everything looks good, and then catastrophe strikes, which is not that different, Hank, from a lot of the trust no one, a lot of the domestic suspense novels start when it looks like somebody has everything, the perfect life, you know, great marriage, kids, career, whatever, and then bang comes
They
the
tell
fall.
you, they tell you that in writing 101, right? If everybody's happy and everybody gets all the answers, that's not a very interesting book.
No,
So
no.
something bad has got to happen, and something bad happens to Richie, as you say, Michael, in sentence 2. So it's not giving anything away. But yeah, you know, that Ted is sort of trying, but not totally trying, to claw himself back up. But he has sort of accepted a lot in life until this happens, and then everything changes for him. How did you, though? How did you decide to take this particular surplus money, I don't know, scheme or method, and think, oh yeah, that would make a really good book? Because nobody else would think that. How did you decide to do that?
Wow. It's something I did, and therefore I knew it. I knew that there's various ways of playing games with it and with other real estate transactions that can hide money, launder money, and that's also a part of this as well, that laundering money for the developers. And I thought it was just both arcane enough and easily explained enough that I could make someone understand this and get a little bit of a charge out of the fact that this really goes on. This happens. So
it does make you really think about it, you know, and every time you read about a real estate transaction, or, you know, I've done millions of stories about foreclosures and how really complicated that process is, and how people can be harmed along the way and manipulated along the way. But you start out with the murder mystery. I mean, you take us right from moment one into that Richie was dead, and then his surprising wife comes in. So this whole array of incredibly colorful characters start. What was it like to write this? Or did you know the whole story, or did you just see what happened? How do you do it?
I knew a story. 3 versions later, I figured out this story, and there lots of things that I tried that I wrote this very much seat of the pants. I don't know that I would do this again. A little bit of plotting makes life much easier, but
I wouldn't know.
But this time was really just I don't know where this is going, but I'm just going to keep following it. It's a noir love story, and let's let's follow it and see what happens.
So was it fun to write, or were you pulling your hair out, or did you, where did you write this? Take us where you were, and did you, I mean, it's funny, it's witty. Did you laugh when you were writing it? Did you worry? How about the process?
Preface it's right here in this room, but it's also a writer's workshop that I belong to, and that's been working with them for years. It's down to just three of us at this point, but they're a big part of keeping me on track. But I wrote this. It was actually finished and done well before the pandemic. But it's a full-time thing. I come and I do this 6-8 hours a day, and it's work, and therefore sometimes it is maddening. But I promised myself after the Jason Stafford series of plugging one out every year, that I was going to have some fun.
Oh.
And I did. I had a lot of fun with this book. Some of these characters I just can't wait to get going with the next book and round them out. I think so far, Mohammed the driver becomes a much more central character in the next book. I'm crazy about Mohammed. So. And
where did he come from?
Oh, actually, he came from a Yemeni guy that I knew years ago, who was named Mohammed, and he eventually became a citizen. The day before his test, this was a long time ago. This was back in the 70s, and we were giving him grief. You all said for your test, and he said, yeah. And I said, okay, who's the president? And he said, everybody knows that, Johnny Carson.
Was that a joke? That was a joke, right?
That's a joke, yes.
Okay. I thought, okay, no, he didn't pass with that. Although depending on the test, whoever was giving the test, But but you take us to Queens. And could this have happened anywhere else? And why did you do that? And talk about being in Queens.
Queens is the place that people drive through. They don't look at it as they go through. They stay on the LIE or Grand Central Parkway, and they ignore Queens. Queens is where everybody who's from Queens wants to be someplace else. And yet there are these enclaves that is it's going to feature in the next book. Everybody calls it Mama Moots. It's an Italian deli. It's been there 5 generations. They make the most extraordinary mozzarella, which is why it's Mama Moots. And she runs the place, and she's the big boss there.
Oh, I thought you were going to say big cheese.
Yeah. And there are places in Queens with real long routes. College Point, which has changed so much over the years, and yet you go through and you find properties there that have changed hands twice in 300 years.
Because, how did you find out this? How did you do this?
Part of this was way back when, doing my side hustle was doing these crazy real estate projects, and one of the partners was concentrating on Brooklyn, another on Manhattan, and so I said, okay, I'll take Queens, and learned a whole lot about the borough, but also about how these various schemes work. And, there's all kinds of Trump stories about, how he operated and whatnot. He's no different from any of them. They all do this. This is how the business is done. It's not, he stands out because he brands. Many of them don't. But cutting corners and whatnot, and appraising buildings for whatever you say it's worth today and something different tomorrow. All of this is absolute standard stuff. So.
But along with the financial knowledge that you gained, you can find out a lot about the people from the real estate who lived there and why they left and why they moved there and how long they stayed and how much they cared about it.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, talk about Gallagher's, even the pub.
The Gallagher's. There's a Gallagher's in my town here in Seacliff, and it's not far off from the Gallagher's in the book, I was writing a strict Irish pub kind of place, and somebody pointed out, that's kind of like 30 years ago, Queens, right? And I said, you're absolutely right. Right now, some Chinese entrepreneur bought Gallagher's and does a dim sum lunch and a brunch, and it's still Gallagher's, but it's also Queens. It's changing and it's multicultural, multi-ethnic. So.
Why is it so much that way, Michael? Why is Queens so, you pointed out, you think it's the most ethnically diverse. Why is that true of the boroughs in New York?
There's plenty of, still plenty of places where new immigrants can come and plot themselves. And there's one scene that takes place in kind of a flop house that a grocer runs over his store, where all of these cooks, day laborers, dishwashers who take care of all of that business for the city, they all live there in essentially dorms, and they live there eight to a room, in bunk beds, sending half of their money home to families, and you can do that in Queens. You cannot do that in any other borough at this point. There's no real estate left. Queens, you can still do that, and it draws people in. They bring in their families and friends, and there's areas where everyone comes from the same little village in the mountains of Mexico, and they all live in a 3-block radius in Queens. Why? Because they were just kept, this is how you do it. You get here, I'll get you a job washing dishes, and after that, you're on your own. So
I'm thinking about what you're discussing exactly, and about how the different languages that would be spoken in Queens, like Tower of Babel, that sometimes, right? That sometimes people don't understand each other, whether it's because they're speaking a different language literally, or because they're speaking on different planes in English. Right? Is that where this is from, or where is this come from? Where did it come from?
The tower itself, actually, when I first started telling people about this, they said, no one's going to build this huge tower in Corona. That's crazy. And I said, look, Long Island City has exploded upward. But that's just because it's one stop from Manhattan on the subway. That's never going to happen in Corona. Well, actually, they're building one in Astoria.
What did you think when you thought?
About 2 miles away from where I said this was going to happen. So.
No, but I mean, it's a good combination. The title is a perfect combination of real estate and miscommunication.
and miscommunication, and the fact that yeah, the story of the Tower of Babel, that all of these people are suddenly thrust unable to communicate with each other,
Yeah.
and because of the vanity of creating this tower to heaven, and that's what happens here. That our developer, the crooked politicians, and
Because they all want to do it, because they all want to do it their way. You know,
yes,
they want to be in charge. I mean, those characters must have been so much fun for you to write.
yes, yep. And a friend who helps me out with a lot of the legal, criminal, police kind of issues. She's an ADA, assistant district attorney. And I was talking about the politicians and how much I'm going to be bribing them. And she said, oh, no, that's way too much. They take practically nothing. You can buy a politician in Queens
right?
for peanuts. So,
Wow. So she was giving you the menu or the price range of how much it would cost to get somebody to do a certain thing. Wow. That's good info. And that's a good friend to tell you
yes, yeah,
that kind of stuff. But you see, what you just said is also such an indication of sort of this, there's a tone of your book that's, not only smart, as Barbara and I were talking about, but just so funny. They're just so witty and so, like, either knowingly or unknowingly hilarious. Did you chortle while you were writing it? How did that, was this the characters just coming into their own?
that sense of humor is it's something that I have to have in anything I'm reading or writing. It's got to be there. There was that really powerful book last year about the woman escaping Mexico with
American
her child.
Dirt. American
Yes,
Dirt.
yeah. And I going through it, I said, it's not a funny story, but there's got to be a moment in this heartbreaking horror story where something funny happens, where there's some moment, and that was my main complaint with that book. It's got to be there no matter what the story is. There's got to be some humor. That's how I approach life, and helped keep me sane this last year. So.
Yeah, if everything is so terrible, at some point it's like, oh my golly, this is so terrible. This is hilarious. What's going to happen next? I was during the pandemic. I read an article where someone had said, "Ooh, the Loch Ness monster." They saw the Loch Ness monster, and somebody else said, "Yeah, so what, really? Well, there's nothing. There's the murder hornet, and there's the whatever there are, and it's just too awful. The whole thing is too awful." So you leaven this sad and powerful and really kind of revealingly important story about how the world really works with this dry humor. It's fun to read.
Great.
Don't you think, Barbara? It's
I do, but that's why I like the Jason Safford books too. And I thought that they were very, very entertaining. They were also, you couldn't help but learn things when you read them because it's not a milieu that you would necessarily know. And I think the story arc in this is, you've got a guy who, achieves a certain level, then he has a fall from grace. And then rather than, as often happens, trying to claw his way back up to the same level, he finds a comfort zone in which he can operate and not get hurt again and not risk a lot, but he can still, make a living, whatever it all is. And then having achieved that, something happens and he has to reconsider whether that's how it's like a double, first it's a fall and then his life is going to perhaps fall apart again. It's not a single calamity, but potentially too. And I think that's really interesting because more often we just see the one and then the climb back. And often especially in legal thrillers, the guy like goes solo or he signs up for a sleazy law firm or, whatever might happen. And he kind of gets to stasis, but he can't really, he's not necessarily happy with it. Or if he does get to stasis, it's usually because he's found he can do good for people in a different way than he could do when he was billing $500 an hour for some whatever. And I find those kinds of stories really interesting. I think there's a sort of a parallel. There's kind of a middle-aged divorce scenario, where a woman who's been happily married for whatever, all of a sudden her events blow up her life. Usually it's her husband. He either runs off with the secretary or he does whatever it is and blasts her life. And there she is, with again, a fall from grace. And most often those stories require her to go reinvent herself somewhere. She becomes a baker in Seattle or, whatever, and almost always finds a new partner. And, you can see that maybe she's going to put her personal life back together. But almost always the jerk, the one who blew up her life, the former husband, sees the error of his ways and wants to reconcile. And then she has the pleasure of saying,
yeah, well, he deserves it.
Yeah, and I'm going to go this new direction. But every once in a while, you can find one where either she takes the first guy back because his screw up was forgivable or whatever it is, or she's just so happy in her new life she never even considers
that's what a book is about, isn't it? That's what every good book is about. Somebody being something and their world gets thrown into disarray, and then they have to figure out what to do. And they right, Michael, and sometimes they make the right decision and whatever right is. And sometimes things happen that just like real life, that we can't predict, and then we have to deal with that. And that's the story.
Well, my point was that most often with books where women are doing this, it's about the relationship and finding a new family or sometimes a career. But with men, it tends to be much more career oriented rather than
that's interesting.
Family oriented, if you see what I mean. But if we're still back to Milton, we're still back to Paradise Lost, and will paradise be regained? And but it is, it's a classic storytelling trope, it's gone on for centuries. And then part of the question is, what is paradise regained? What will be? We know what the Paradise Lost was, but what will be the paradise that is fashioned out of the loss?
And that's one of the many things that's so wonderful about Tower of Babel is that it's not only a man and the profession, but a man and a relationship. Both of those stories and both of those processes you tackle in this book, which is a juggle.
It is, and Ted is still very caught in his old life and the ties there to his ex-wife, to his ex-wife's grandfather, to all of that he's tried to leave behind. They've forced him away, and yet it's still so much a part of him, and not a good part. He's got to find his own feet and hasn't yet, and that's his process here.
And one of the things that I think about you too, and we talked about this a tiny bit earlier, just you referenced it when you were talking about being an actor. And I know you're also an avid sailor. And I think one of the things that connects writing and sailing and acting, one of the things is that there's a feel that you have when it's right. When you're caught the wind properly, or your part properly, or you're in the book properly, there's a rightness about it. Do you feel that when you're writing? Is it a
wow? That's really cool. Yes. Yeah. and couldn't think where you were going with this, and yet you're
Welcome
right.
to my husband's life, right?
There's a real through line for that. That all the even as a trader, all the preparation in the world only gets you to the point where you can now surf, and who knows what the next wave is going to be, or the next puff of wind, or what your character is going to decide he's got to do, and won't let you get away with not letting him do it. And so there's you have to go with it in each case, and yet also feel like you're on top of it at the same time.
I mean, there's a freedom because with the understanding of how physics works, right? And how, your brain works and how people work, there's a freedom, but underpinned with knowledge and underpinned with a little bit of like a mixture of recklessness and confidence.
Yes. And there's no way around the old 10,000 hour rule. You've got to sit in the chair and write. That's what you got to do. But after those 10,000 hours, there are times when it's just heavenly, and you can sail along and follow your character's lead, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of
Lovely
fun.
insight, Hank. Very, very well said. Let's call Patrick up from his, let's have him do his magic act and rejoin us and see if there are comments that people have made or questions that they have.
Howdy. There are a few, not too many, but let's see here. Diane asks, she says, do your characters sometimes lead you in different directions than you have in mind?
Oh, when the wind changes, right? Talk about that. It's a good question, Diane.
Yes. Yeah. You can't make them do. I've had to do long rewrites because I wrote myself into a corner where I expected him to get to this point and be able to do X, Y, Z, and it just wasn't working. It just wasn't real, and I have to go back, tear it out, and try another approach, because that character becomes quite real to me in the process.
But it is cool that you recognize, you try it and you try it and you try it, and then you think, this isn't working.
You're right.
And sometimes that self-doubt, you're wrong and you should just persevere. And sometimes the self-doubt is right and you should just cut bait and go back. That's
That's where an editor can be useful.
Yeah.
Yes.
What about you, Hank? Do you have that experience?
Well, yeah. And I learned over the years to really embrace that. If something isn't working, I don't give up, I'll give it a try. I mean, there was one book I wrote where I really thought something had to happen. And soon after I thought, ooh, she's going to do this, she got killed. And I thought, no, she can't die because I need her in the end for the thing. And then, but it just, I remember sitting right here at this desk saying, I'm so sorry, you have to go. And I didn't want it to happen, but then, and here's my point, and I know you're wondering, it turned out to be the best thing that could have possibly happened. That was my subconscious saying, you're on the wrong path, sister. And I'm going to make this happen and try to show you that. And your brain, I mean, Dennis Lane used to talk about, I saw that fantastic interview with Dennis and Gillian Flynn the other day. It was amazing. That Dennis used to say that he thought about his book so much that when he got home, he was surprised that more wasn't written in the manuscript. More wasn't done because, somebody was thinking. So that your subconscious, don't you think, Michael, is working all the time on this?
Oh, yes. And this is a constant that thank goodness for the writer's workshop, because I say this to them all the time. Well, I knew what I was talking about. because I've been thinking about this from the moment I woke up in the morning and said, no, she wouldn't say it that way. She'd say it this way. And I've got to go fix that right now. And it's with me all the time.
I think Barbara and I have talked about this before. I always say, what would someone really do? Not in the plot of my story do, but really in real life do. What would this person really do? And that is often something different than I thought. And that's always a door that you can open.
And sometimes you can go back and it's a matter of just filling in and saying, oh, well, if this happens and if I make them a little more like this, then I can, but at some point, if you're just pushing it too hard, it's just wrong.
I'm so sorry, Patrick. I know we have more questions, but let me just ask you one thing then, based on what you were saying. You know, as an actor, and I want to hear about some of the roles you played if we have time, but as an actor, you know that too. You know, if you're trying to play a character a certain way and you have your part, and if you don't understand that character and the motivation, it's going to be false. Do you use that when you're writing?
Yeah, most definitely. I play these parts either out loud talking because I want to hear how that character makes that sound. I need to know that in order to write it. But it's going on in my head all the time, and I'm shifting points of view, even though I'm not on the page. I am in my head. What's that line about? What's when you're writing? What's the bad guy doing? I'm constantly in the other guy's head, as well as in my protagonist, to say, is this real? Is this real for both people in this scene?
I know that's a thing that you're supposed to do, is always wonder what the bad guy is doing, whether they're in the scene or not. I can't do that because I never know who the bad guy is. I know a grown-up author is supposed to do that, but I can't do it because I don't know. Do you think that this heart of your book is what made your happy editors want more of these?
That made my editor happy?
Yeah, and wanted more of these. I mean, this is a series now, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Good. Right up till the end of the book, I still wasn't sure if this could be a series. And I got encouragement from my publisher, and at that point, now how to write the ending, and leave the hints for the next book, and how much do I tie up? And it was great. It was a lot of fun writing the ending at that point, because suddenly the world was wide open of what I could do with this and what's coming next.
So you could end part of the story, some of the stories, but not, you didn't have, I mean, it's very difficult in a book to have it be satisfyingly finished when you know there isn't going to be another book. You know, there's some things that an author must do.
Yes.
In a series, the emotional things don't have to be, suddenly somebody doesn't have to recover from being an alcoholic, hooray, in 400 pages. That that can go on. So you had you finished, so you hadn't finished when you realized it would be a series.
Right. I had not finished. I was close, and I had definite ideas about what I was going to do, but suddenly realizing that this could be a series. I don't know how long a series, but I want to do more with what happens next with this stupid tower. I haven't answered all of these questions, and there's.
But you like the characters.
All of these characters.
You like the characters and you want to see more of them, and that speaks very well for how you created them. Patrick, was there another question or two that you might want to present?
Yeah, it's funny though, because you literally just answered the exact question I was going to ask, which is Debbie asks, how do you see this going forward as a series? Does the ending lead into another book? And you just answered that precisely.
Oh,
very wise, Debbie, very wise.
Thank you, Debbie.
Yeah, she's right on it. let's see here. Well, Diane just makes a comment. She says, it sounds like you did many other things in your life and you did them well, but deep down you have always been a writer. Is that true?
I would say, yes, that's true. I have always written, me and words and reading and writing are without them, I don't know what I'd do, no matter what else I was doing for a living at the time. So.
Well, okay, so let's hear about some of your acting roles. Did you ever?
Yeah, I do want to hear that, don't you?
Yeah.
In 1 year, I was on every soap shot in New York City.
Oh, come on. How did that happen?
I worked in regional theater. I'd done Shakespeare. I worked with a company in New York City, a small company it was a comedy stage company. We did comedies of any period. And I said, I'm taking a year and I'm just going to do the usual route. And I did a couple of commercials and I presented myself to every casting agent at every soap. And I'd go in and I did extras, I did bit parts, walk-ons, day players, and didn't add up to a whole lot at the end of the year, but I worked.
So are you the elegant executive or the cuddly grandpa? What were you?
Oh, the best was the day I was a cop.
So let's hear your
I was a
line.
cop and I had lines, so that was really cool. But it meant I was in costume all day long, and so I go down to the cafeteria, and the elevator door opens, and people just back away and let the cop go first. It's like
that's an insight, though, isn't
cool. I like this.
That's an insight, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's an insight that you can use.
I was different. I was, people didn't see me as a cast member, in uniform or in costume. They saw me as a cop, and they treated me very differently than it was.
Well, it was a forecast of things to come. If you were actually in law enforcement, you've got to love that. Right. You know what? It's been wonderful to see you again, Michael. I can't thank you enough for joining us, and Hank for making it a spectacular, a stellar program, as always. It's really been.
I need to say before I forget, if you see the flowers behind me, the gorgeous orchids and tulips and roses, those are from Michael. And it just shows you what a wonderful, affectionate, loving, thoughtful person you are. Thank you. They are completely gorgeous.
This from one of the most generous writers that I know who
She really is too. It's a miracle to me that she does everything that she does all the time. I'm constantly in awe. So let us remind you, start of a new series. You do not have to have read a Michael Sears book before, Tower of Babel, with clearly a sequel to come. And we do have autographed copies here at the Poison Pen. So let me thank all of you for joining us. There'll be a podcast tomorrow. The video will live on forever. So you can tell your friends about it in case they happen to miss this. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, authors. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Patrick.
You bet.
Congratulations, Michael.
Thanks.